Yeah, you're going to look at me. Start the music. That ain't the screen? Good evening. I'm Reverend Wendell Anthony. Welcome to the Turning Point, sponsored by the Freedom Institute for Economic, Social Justice, and People Empowerment. And as you know, we've just come through a major general election. We've been quite successful, and certainly one of the reasons that many people believe that it was a successful election was because of the unusual and the very high African-American voter turnout. The fact that we turned out in numbers all across the nation that have moved us from people who have seemingly in their own mind, in many cases, no power, to having a whole lot of power. It was an historic election from South Carolina to Georgia to Michigan to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, certainly out there in Arizona and many other places. Matter of fact, they're still counting the votes because of the overwhelming numbers that we were able to result in terms of the 2020 general election. But the bottom line is this. Now that we're into it and doing it, we can't stop here. Why did we have such a tremendous turnout? What made this happen? Who were some of the actors who were behind the scenes making the voting surge, this black wave of reality? And we want to talk about that tonight. My guests are Miss Yvette McElroy Anderson, who is the field director for the Fannie Lou Hamer Political Action Committee, and also Miss Kamala Landrum, who is the executive director for the Detroit branch of the NAACP, and we may be joined later by Hester Wheeler, who is the assistant secretary of state for the state of Michigan. And so stay with us as we have this discussion, because it's important that we reflect, we understand who we are, what we did, and how we did it so that we can do it again. And the fact that people are now trying to take it back, even though we have put it out front. And the question becomes, will we allow them to steal the election right in front of our face and right under our noses? But here to talk about how we got here are the ladies that I just mentioned, as we are joined now by Miss Yvette McElroy Anderson and Miss Kamala Landrum. I see both of you all are wearing red tonight. Is there something symbolic about that? Or am I just making things up in my own mind? Oh, I see. What's the symbolism? Is that having something to do with some sorority or something, or what?
Well, we are both proud members of the Detroit Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Oh, is that correct?
Absolutely.
I see. Are there any other sororities other than the Deltas? I mean, what?
Well, yeah, they exist, Reverend.
You're familiar with the Divine Nine.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, very good. Well, first of all, Miss Anderson, you are the field director for Fannie Lou Hamer. What does that mean, and what is Fannie Lou Hamer all about?
So Fannie Lou Hamer is a political action committee that is committed to representing and advocating for those who are often overlooked by the political process.
I see.
So we've been around nearly 30 years now, and we are committed to voter education, mobilization, and activation.
So, I mean, is this like a grassroots organization? Do you endorse candidates, proposals? I mean, what?
We advocate for proposals and candidates, and we are just really focused on those individuals in our community that have often been overlooked by the political process.
Why Fannie Lou Hamer? I mean, she was obviously an icon in our community, but why Fannie Lou Hamer?
Well, we know that she was a member of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and that she went to the convention and demanded that her voice be heard and our voices be heard. One of the famous quotes that I love beside I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired is the one that where she says, I will fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom. And we continue with that, her legacy today, keeping that in mind as we move forward.
Ms. Landrum, you are the executive director for the Detroit branch in NAACP, and what does that mean? That you run the organization, or what does that mean as the executive director?
Absolutely, Reverend. I have the esteemed honor of being the staff lead for the Detroit branch NAACP. I'm responsible for implementing all of our programming, helping with our fundraising, and making sure that the mission of the organization is carried out in the city of Detroit.
What the NAACP does a lot of things. Obviously, voting and registering people to vote is like a mantra, and it's obvious since I'm associated with that organization. But the NAACP has been accused of, for years, of being, are you still relevant? Are you doing the things that are essential in terms of moving the community? How do you respond to that when you hear that?
So, Reverend, this is really an important subject to me and topic of what do we do as an organization? Are we relevant? And when you see the amount of young people that still come into our building seeking programming, looking for leadership development opportunities, trying to find a space where they can talk about what's going wrong in their school system, what's going wrong in their community, they come to the NAACP and their mentors within to get guidance on how to respond to those community issues. We also receive dozens of calls daily from individuals that are facing discrimination, whether it be on their jobs, in relationships, with police and law enforcement. I mean, there's so many different areas where people call the NAACP seeking help, where you often can't call anybody else. So are we relevant? Absolutely. Our phone lines, our emails, and the young people that walk into our office tell us so.
So you're not ready to down the vine right now. You think that you still have some tenure left?
Oh, absolutely we do. You can see where this country is right now and where we need to go, and the perfect fit is the NAACP. We've been around since 1912. We've fought many of the legal battles that we have today, that we are even able to live where we want to live in the city of Detroit, go to school where we want to in the city of Detroit. Those are all efforts from the Detroit branch NAACP. So it's really important that folks understand the leadership within our branch and our organization and how that's able to make a good impact in this city.
So we've been around a long time, and particularly the Detroit branch has been around since 1912. That's when Detroit was born. The organization as a whole was 1909, but Detroit in 1912. And one of the trademarks of Detroit is, of course, this dinner that y'all have, this big dinner. A lot of people just say all y'all do is have a dinner. Is that it?
Absolutely not, Rev. The dinner is our largest fundraiser. And as we all know, freedom is not free. And so you have to have money to be able to file a lawsuit. You have to have money to be able to take a bus to D.C. to fight the Supreme Court or fight the legislature, to go to Lansing, fight for affirmative action, fight against Proposal E. You can't do that without funds. So the fundraiser that we have, yes, we give you chicken because we need to make some money off of it. And that allows us to implement all of our programming. We have 5 game changers that we work up under: economic sustainability, education, health, criminal justice, and civic engagement. And in order for us to do our programming in those game changers, we have to be able to pay for the costs that are associated with them.
Well, Ms. Anderson, obviously the game was changed in 2020. We now have a new president-elect who seems to have some issue getting elected because the current occupant does not want to relinquish it and let it go.
Yeah, he's making the transition pretty difficult.
What do you think about that? And as people who have been out there on the front lines helping folk to vote, registering them, take robocalling, I assume robocalling and sound cards, and like what the NAACP, how is that going over in the community? What do you think about this current situation we're in?
Well, it's really an embarrassment that the current occupant is taking the posture that he's taken and not, moving forward in assisting with the transition for the president-elect. We would love to see it be a gracious situation where the baton is being handed over. But unfortunately, and really no surprise, that the current occupant head, number 45, continues to act in the manner that he has, and he's not exercising any civility or any type of decorum in terms of how he has governed himself.
Let me ask you this, and let me talk about some numbers. I was looking at this earlier today. Donald Trump won the state of Michigan by 11,000 votes in 2016. True. And he won, I think, Wisconsin, something like about 22,000 votes. He won by a small minority of votes. And this year, in 2020, just to give you some indication as to where we are with that, and I was looking at this earlier today, and that is that he got in 2016 5,000 more votes in Detroit and while he almost lost, Biden received almost 1,000 votes less than Clinton in 2016. But Joe Biden received 94% of the vote in Detroit, while Trump got 12,654 votes. He had a 94% margin. Trump got 5% of the total vote of 250,000 cast. How do you and what do you attribute that number, that kind of turnout? Because it was massive when you think about the number of black votes. We're talking about 94% of the black vote went to Joe Biden and 5% went to Donald Trump. How did we come to that?
Well, this was an election season, so there's a number of things that have impacted what we saw in 2020, that is. So we had early absentee voting that started.
So that made a difference.
Oh, absolutely, because we saw people at satellite centers voting at record numbers 2-3 weeks before the election even started. So that was, and there's no reason absentee, so you don't have to have a reason to vote absentee. The satellite centers were throughout the city of Detroit, and that just gave an opportunity for people to vote where they're most comfortable, near their own homes. We had the drop boxes where you could pick up your absentee ballot, go home, do some research, study, watch watch the commercials and the media, and then make your decision. So those things definitely impacted what we saw in terms of turnout. In Wayne County, we had the highest voting that we've seen in 30 years in the county of Wayne.
In 30 years.
In 30 years.
And so, Ms. Landrum, how do you see that? I mean, what did the NAACP do this year that it had not done in the past, if anything?
Well, Reverend, I want to tag on just to the end of why do I think the turnout was so high. And I think that we cannot ignore, in addition to the passing of Promote the Vote in 2018, which made voting access a lot easier for Michiganders across, or everyone across the state of Michigan, we still cannot ignore COVID-19. We cannot ignore how large of a role racism played in this election, and we can't ignore the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. Everyone was sitting at home when they saw these killings. And when you are watching that, you see the protests that happened all across the country and really all across the nation. People were motivated in a different way than they were in 2016 and even 2008 and 2012 to have their voices heard at the polls. So we may explore that a little bit more. I'm sure we're going to talk about it, but we can't ignore how much of a role that played in motivating voters to take advantage of those early voting opportunities that Yvette discussed.
I often get the question, and since we're on that point, do you think people were more motivated to vote against Donald Trump as opposed to being for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
I think people, in my role as NAACP, I think people wanted to vote for opportunity to actually seek equality. I think people wanted to vote for a criminal justice platform that seemed achievable and attainable. I think people wanted to vote for a health system in COVID-19 where things could get under control even if they had to stay at home a little bit more.
But you know, some black folk were really upset with Joe Biden because of the crime bill in 1994, and they were upset with Kamala Harris because she was a prosecutor out there in California, talking about she put more black males in jail than anybody, and the other side was running commercials about that and trying to say, y'all remember Joe Biden? He's responsible for the rise in black men in the criminal industrial complex, and how can you vote for him?
Well, Rev, it wasn't just Joe that passed the bill and voted for the bill and wrote the bill, and it wasn't just Kamala who sat in the prosecutor's office. She had an entire team, too. And I could respect them more for asking for a chance to get it right again if they did not get it right the first time than someone who put a full-page ad accusing 5 innocent young black men of a crime that they did not commit, asking for them to get the death penalty. So I take my chance with someone who's asked for forgiveness.
Are you talking about your current president?
Technically, he's our current president. Yes, sir.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes,
And let me say, people at home, if you have a question or comment, you can text us the question or comment to the chat, or just send in a question or something you want to ask these two young ladies, or make a comment about the election. We welcome that as well. Ms. Anderson.
So both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can't be looked at in a vacuum. So just as Camilla said,
By the way, I think Kamala Harris, since I'm looking at her, I think she's an AKA. Isn't
she is an AKA, and we are sisters regardless of that.
I see.
We are both members of service sororities.
Okay.
Both.
All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I knew you would look for that opportunity to get a plug in.
I mean, I love all the sororities and fraternities. Go ahead.
Yes. So we just can't look at either of them in a vacuum. When we looked at the platform, they talked about health care, they talked about criminal justice reform, reimagining the police. So when you're looking
How come y'all don't want to defund the police?
Well,
I mean, there's a lot of people talking about defunding the police.
We need police officers, and the majority, I believe, of police officers are good people, and they have the interests of our community at the forefront. However, we can have some training. Our own state police here in Michigan could benefit from some training in terms of some diversity and inclusion. We'd like to see that. But in terms of just defunding, we need the police officers. We need to have that law enforcement arm in our society, but we also need to have community policing where the police are working in the community and they're not always looking through a lens of criminality.
Ms. Landrum, I mean, we often hear there's this notion, because I've been a part of a statewide clergy committee that's talking about police reform, et cetera, and that's a major issue. And it's not difficult, it's not issue. We just want folks to stop killing us. That's real simple, but it's very complex. And so when you talk about police reform, and what are you looking for? Now that it is clear that we have a president-elect, and once the smoke clears, who will be assuming the position of the presidency of the United States, what are you looking for from this administration?
Well, Rev, I'm looking for a national set of standards that everyone has to be held to. I'm looking forward to data collection where officers that have committed wrongs in one community are not allowed to easily go into another and commit those wrongs. Your case should follow you wherever you go in this particular area because you're protecting and serving the community, and you shouldn't get to choose to protect each community differently. You should protect us all the same. I would say what I expect most is to have a community voice lifted in this administration, and we can see that because of the boots on the ground individuals that they've even chosen to help in getting the vote out for this 2020 election. So I want it to be a national set of standards that everyone has to adhere to. It should not be a difference between what a chokehold is considered here in Michigan and what is considered in New York, or what, stand your ground laws are in Florida and what they are in California.
So you got some people who just want to defund the police department, and I don't know where they want to go with that, but to defund the police department without having something to put in place of the department still leaves a vacuum. So, and what you just said, talking about reform, talking about, I guess, restructuring or reimagining how these funds could be used. I mean, what do you say to many who are in your kind of generation who are clamoring for that?
Defund the Police was literally a slogan to help bring attention to the matter. And so when you have, on one end, you want the police to respond to everything, but really you don't want the police to respond to every single situation that happens. There is a need or an opportunity for social workers to come out. There is an opportunity for community advocates, community policing. Every situation does not require the criminal law enforcement to come and handle it. And so when we say reimagine, we mean stop putting, the police officer shouldn't also have to be the medic and be the social worker and be CPS.
There are states where they have a special unit. I know Utah is one, and I've talked to some folk here in Detroit about that, where they have a couple of police officers and a mental health worker or provider or counselor. They have people that can de-escalate, so not to put their lives at jeopardy, and that depends on the situation. But is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. I was having a conversation earlier today with some police officers and community members, and one of the ladies said, you should know if someone is having a diabetic coma and being under attack versus drunk driving. That's a major situation that someone could be arrested for, and if you're not trained to identify the difference, that's a big the repercussion of going down for a DUI versus needing medical attention could have huge impact on your life. So I think that officers need to be trained to identify what additional services are needed, but I think it's unfair for us to demand that they provide all of the service, especially if we're not going to increase their pay to go with it.
Well, we really, too, if we're talking about funding, we need to start funding mental health. We need to start funding mental health services and mental health providers and ensuring that people that are suffering from mental health issues are not turned into criminal justice issues.
And that's a very important point, because we've had cases where just recently, not too long ago, this young man was killed with a knife, and his mother was telling the police officers, don't shoot him, don't shoot him. And there was two officers, and they were backing up, still firing. I think they fired something like 7 shots apiece, killing him. And he had, obviously, mental issues. But police officers are not trained for that. They don't go to school for that. They're trained to really take you out and to do what they do. But we are often the victims, and even though we've seen certain cases where persons with a lighter hue have been spared the bullet, and persons with a darker hue have received the bullet. And I think I'm right on that, because the evidence bears that out. But nonetheless, that's an issue that we have. Let me just say this. In Florida, because we're talking about the impact of the black vote, and should black people, are we entitled to more, less, or the same? Let me just give you some indication. In Florida, 53% of the voters for President-elect Joe Biden, 53% of those voters for Trump were white. That's an indication of the numbers of white folks who still supported him. In the state of Florida also, 22% who were for Biden were African American or black, 20% were Latino or Hispanic, and 4% were others. Also for Donald Trump, 2% were African American, 16% were Latino or Hispanic, 3% were other. And I said 53%, that really number is 79% were white. In Georgia, those who voted for President-elect Joe Biden, 38% were white, 54% were African American or black, 4% were Latino or Hispanic, 4% were other. And in Georgia, 90% who voted for Donald Trump were white, 4% were African American or black, 3% were Latino or Hispanic, 4% were other. In other words, black folks showed up in these areas.
Yes.
So, does that mean, by virtue of the fact that we showed up, now we expect Vice President currently and President-elect Biden to show up for us? As a matter of fact, he said that when he was talking about just being grateful to the voting turnout and making his statement. He said, black folks showed up for me, the African-American community showed up for me, and I promise I'm going to have your back. What does that mean? And how do we hold him and them accountable?
Well, I really believe that it's important for us to start making our list now. We should be making our list and be able to deliver it to the president on day one.
But is this like Christmas? You know, you make a list.
Yes, we should make make a list, check it twice.
I mean, we've been real nice because we voted, and he's there. Matter of fact, if Jim Clyburn had not voted and came out and emphasized in South Carolina, he would not have made it through the primary and could not have run. And now that he ran, there was not a red wave or a blue wave, there was a black wave.
Yes.
And in particular, there were black women all over the country who voted unquestionably for the Biden-Harris team. So what do we have the right to expect?
We have the right to expect health care where is no disparities about the type of health care that we're going to receive. Child care, we have the right to some economic opportunities. We need some changes in the economic opportunities for people in our community as far as business, fair banking. We are looking for some mental health. We have to fund mental health at a higher rate than we've done because we see that so many times that's what the police are dealing with. So we have to do something about mental health. And we got to make sure that education is right at the top because the disparities and inequities that exist in the way education is funded, especially for those in our community, we should get more in our community because we have greater deficits in terms that are the result of systematic poverty.
You mentioned that. Go ahead, Ms. Landry, and then I'll come back and ask you.
I just want to add, we have, to respect the demands of the young people, the young black people that showed up for the Biden-Harris ticket.
Right.
And what they have and what we have explicitly talked about is racial justice within law enforcement, student loan debt, to have opportunity to even be able to buy a house, to be able to start a business, to be able to easily access what we pay through our tax dollars back into our homes. So we cannot ignore their voices because that is the majority of the folks that showed up for the Biden-Harris ticket.
I want to stay right there because on Ms. Landrum, when we talk about what we have a right to expect, one of the things that happens when you change administrations, your whole team goes. Secretary of Education, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce, other cabinet members, United Nations ambassadors to all these countries around the world. And then there are people that are not in that list, but they're advisors to the president. and he or she sends them all around to make sure certain things happen. When you think about that, where do black people fit into that? And who are some of the kinds of people that come to your mind that if you were asked about cabinet positions, and you mentioned education, you mentioned jobs, you talk about foreign policy. I mean, I know there are some people that come to my mind, but what do you think about that? I mean, should we weigh into that? And should we be listened to?
Absolutely. I think that we have the right to be in any one of those positions, just like every single person else that wants to apply. This country does better when they trust black people, and that's because we know people. We know ourselves. We know how people operate. We know culturally what feels good, what doesn't. We understand policy, and we know what works for our families. And so when you know what works for everyday people, and then you have an opportunity to lift that up on a national stage, that's what will make this country and this nation better. I think the first person that obviously she could pick whatever job she wants to is my sister, Stacey Abrams. Wherever she wants to go, she has earned her right to be there, and we can keep going. Go ahead.
You know, you mentioned Stacey Abrams, and obviously she comes to mind, but I'm just wondering, would she have more influence and power being an appointee rather than being almost like a political ambassador where she is? Because she obviously is, when she makes the phone call, they're going to pick up the phone. And if there's some things that are not going right, I'm just theoretically asking the question. Can she do more by being where she is than she can by being in the cabinet, so to speak?
I think that she has showed our community the benefit of training up those who could then fill the shoes that she has wonderfully worn in Georgia. And her brilliance and her education deserves to be on a higher platform to solve some more complex issues that are facing our country.
You know, she may run again for a higher office.
She may, and she should be able to do whatever it is that she wants because she's worked for it.
Is she a Delta?
No, Stacey's not a Delta.
I see, okay. We've been joined by none other than the Assistant Secretary of State, Mr. Hester Wheeler, and I know there was an issue prior to him getting here, and so our prayers, hopefully everything is going all right.
Thank you.
But we've been joined by Hester Wheeler, who's obviously has been on the trail, and the Secretary of State's office has been very busy. What's your role as Assistant Secretary of State, Mr. Wheeler?
First of all, thank you very much, Reverend Anthony, and excuse my tardiness. I guess I'll just reclaim the rest of the time since they've had 35 minutes already.
We didn't say all of that, but go ahead.
But I appreciate special prayers for my sister. She was rushed to the hospital, and in this COVID-19 environment, everybody's hypersensitive. But I have been uniquely blessed to serve as Assistant Secretary of State for Michigan alongside Jocelyn Benson since the 1st of January 2019. And we happened to inherit or come to this office after voters in Michigan in November of 2018 delivered on a whole bunch of new voting rights. So right. The entire political landscape in Michigan is just radically positive. And this year, we saw the impact of Michigan's new voting rights. In fact, we moved from worst to almost first because of the new voting rights. 5.5 million voters went to the poll, 3.3 voted absentee. And traditionally, 25 to 35% of voters vote via the absentee process. But isn't that divine providence in this COVID-19 environment? We were able to actually offset the negative impact of long lines at the poll. 3.3 via absentee, and another 2.2 went to the actual polls. Now, that was significant.
It is very significant, and that's why we're facing these lawsuits.
Yes.
In
Frivolous.
the system.
Frivolous.
What's your response?
Well, the
to
fact
What's
is,
the Secretary of State's response to all of this?
Think about this, Reverend. Think about it, Camellia and Yvette. Tens of thousands of us participated in the process. Did you see any fraud? Did you see any?
No.
So who are these people that don't even live here? They have evidence of fraud. And why did they not go to one majority white Democratic bastion to file lawsuits? In fact, they filed the one lawsuit yesterday they filed in Grand Rapids with the U.S. Attorney versus something that they say happened in Detroit. But there was no foul play. Thousands of voters, thousands of poll workers, thousands of poll watchers saw and participated in the process. So this is frivolous. And the fact is, we got probably more smart people on our side of the process than they do. So bring it on.
Well, one of the things that people need to remember is that their leader, and I say their leader, Donald Trump,
Yes, sir.
said not to vote early. He said,
That's exactly
go
right.
to the polls.
Turned
and
out to be a
vote."
mistake.
And the folk on the other side said, vote early.
That's exactly.
Vote now. Don't wait. Vote absentee. Vote mail in. And both sides did what they were instructed to do.
That's exactly.
Now we have complaints about that.
Think about the fact that we started voting on September 24. We actually had 40 days to get our people to the polls in some significant numbers, and we did our work. We had so many initiatives out of the Secretary of State's office, for example. One was called Voting Matters. In the spirit of Black Lives Matters, we identified the 100 low-performing precincts, and we went to 22 different communities across this state and talked with voters. One of the things we heard over and over and over again is, particularly in poor community, low education type communities, people said, I don't know, I'm an ex-offender, I've served time in prison. People did not know that their right to vote was automatically restored. So we got to pound that issue over and over again.
Well, and if you talk about that, and we have a couple of slides. I want you to get those slides
Yes,
up
sir.
because I want you to comment on them. But
Okay.
Ms. Landrum, I know that one of the things that the Detroit branch has engaged in the past is you've even gone into prisons. And
She's
you've
awesome.
registered eligible voters
Yes.
inside prisons, eligible ones. So don't try, y'all been doing something illegal or out of order. But talk to us about that in terms of the prison situation, because a lot of people, as Mr. Wheeler indicated, don't know that they have that right. If we can get those slides up, go ahead, Ms. Landry.
Reverend, one of the most important facets of our education and voter mobilization program is our Wayne County Jail and Detention voter mobilization effort. We are able, through partnerships with the clerk's office and the sheriff's office, to physically go inside of the detention centers, make sure that those who are eligible, those who are awaiting trial, that they receive a ballot, that they are able to receive absentee ballots, that they are able to actually have their ballot brought to them by the clerk's office so that they can vote.
Awesome.
There is nothing more powerful than seeing someone behind bars take ownership of their vote and decide who's going to be the next judge, who's going to be the next senator.
Right.
And so it's a phenomenal program, and it will always be a part of our voter mobilization efforts.
And how do the inmates respond when you come in there with that kind of...
They like her anyway.
They do. But, Rev, the conversation, honestly, so many of them already knew what was on the ballot even before, especially...
So they are informed.
Oh, they're
even while
informed,
in jail.
especially with the statewide proposal on the electronic
To have the
Police
search warrants
Yes.
for electronic databases. They had so much conversation when you talk about the presidential candidates, but also the prosecutors' races. That was a heavy hitter.
I would imagine they would have.
Oh, they had a lot to say about that.
prosecutor's race. Yeah, okay. Mr. Wheeler,
Yes, sir.
we have a couple of questions. I just want to ask this. And we were showing, before I ask the questions, can you put those slides back up? Because a lot of people don't understand how significant it is. And there's some myths, and
Yes,
then there's
sir.
a fact. Like I have to register in person. And
Yes.
what do you say about
Well,
that?
we were able to educate people that there's so many ways to participate in the process. In fact, you can register, same-day voter registration was huge. 38,000 people registered and voted for the very first time on November 3, for example. And guess what? Over 50% of that 38,000 were under the age of 30. We even had some 21 people over the age of 80. 80 years old, registered and voted on the very same day for the first time in Michigan history. So those were a result of the new voting rights. You, in fact, were able to vote online. Those were registered to vote online. That's what we were trying to educate people. Many of us registered and made application for our absentee ballot online. Jocelyn Benson and our team, we mailed out 4.7 million absentee ballot applications. That was an early signal that we could turn the tide. That increased awareness. It became a part of a national discussion. And the reason why we put so much emphasis again on returning citizens, 8,000 to 9,000 people return home every year in Michigan. About 45% come back to the city of Detroit. That is a very, very important constituency for us. So we were able to, for the very first time, we partnered with the Michigan Department of Corrections, and every person leaving Michigan prisons, effective immediately, has either a driver's license, state ID, and a voter registration card. So that's a reflection of some of the initiatives.
So that's new. And
Yes, sir.
that means that when you come out, you get your driver's license.
That's correct.
And a vote. That's like when you graduate from high school, you should get your diploma and
A voter registration card. That's the stuff we have
Let
to
me ask
advocate
this
for.
question, and I hate to even deal with it and acknowledge it, but it's real. Donald Trump got a higher percentage of black voters, and in some cases, small number, but it's a number of black men, in this year than he did last year. I mean, in
4 years ago,
2016.
yes.
Let me just say, with this cat doing all that he has done, calling black athletes SOBs, pulling babies from their mamas at the border, calling African nations S-hole countries, calling Maxine Waters and even Omarosa out of their names, telling 25,000 lies since he's been in office, slowing down the post office, not allowing the votes to be. How do we explain
Yeah.
brothers voting for this guy and getting an increase? Is it just because they didn't like Biden, or they heard because Biden was involved with the 94 crime? I mean, how do you reconcile that?
I don't have an easy answer other than obviously people have the right to vote however they think they should vote, and they have the right to be wrong.
Yeah. Right.
Uninformed.
And any African American man, any African American that votes against their own best interests, obviously are confused, and I think it speaks to the work that we all have to do. That's why Fannie Lou Hamer is so important. That's why the NAACP is so important. We were able to increase voter participation by 150,000 voters. I mean, Democrats carried this state by nearly 150,000. We lost by 10,000. We took advantage of the additional 40 days. We took advantage of this expanded season, but obviously we didn't go deep enough in certain pockets of the African American community.
And those are some of the folks that we're going to get to our Fannie Lou Hamer Political Action Committee meetings and do things like
How do
government.
people hook up with Fannie Lou Hamer?
They can go to our website, flhpac.org. We hold our general membership meetings the second Tuesday of every month, and we are doing those virtually right now via Zoom. We are always posting information about upcoming activities and articles, and just always trying to make sure that we are educating voters about civic engagement and social justice.
Ms. Landrum, I know that it's important for us to have a decent person in the presidency and his cabinet or her cabinet. But if you don't control the Senate, if you don't have influence there, it makes the job very, very difficult. And one of the first things that Mitch McConnell said when Barack Obama was elected president, we want to make sure he's a one-term president, and we're not going to do anything to make him successful. Now, we have a race in Georgia with two potential senators, Ossoff and Ralph Warnock. And if they are successful, that can determine the control of the Senate. Is there anything that folk can do to help with that kind of situation?
Absolutely. I think that we need to look to the leadership of Georgia for the call of action that they put out for how we can assist. But it does start as simple as a donation. That helps get right ads up. It helps staff somebody that can make some phone calls for virtual phone banking. It helps pay for a Facebook ad. So if you can send a donation to those races, do so. If you can go to Georgia, if you have time, that's what I want to do. I want to take, I'm telling you now, I want to take the whole month off. I want to go to Georgia. I want to be on the ground, knocking doors. And so if you have an opportunity to go down there and help get out the vote, do so. We know what it's like when people from outside your community come in and take over, so I'm not encouraging that. But if you can go be a support system, if you can phone bank virtually from home, if you can call friends or family that live there, help pay for a bus on a college campus to get to the polls, all of those efforts matter and can help and can turn out to be in our favor.
And Stacey Abrams is very, very active in that race. And the Turnout PAC, we can make donations to Turnout PAC in addition to making donations to the candidates. $3, $5, $7, $10. Every effort will matter.
That's right. And I would just add, Reverend Amelia, you just really highlighted something that is especially significant. We know that Georgia is not only home to a bunch of African-American mega churches. Atlanta and Georgia is also home to a bunch of historically black colleges. And that's where we have some natural affinity, we have some natural relationships. That's where we can go and do some of our best work.
And it's all home to a lot of Detroiters now.
That's right. And many of us, that's exactly right. I have a brother that moved to Atlanta. Many of us are related to people who live there, so we can do a lot of good work.
Let me just ask this as we close out, because you also have Keisha Lance, who's a mayor down there.
And a Delta.
Awesome sister.
Yes.
And a member of that sorority, the Delta.
She's a Delta.
I understand. And so you have all of that, and that's significant. But I'm glad you mentioned the sororities and the historical black colleges there, because I know they got to be fired up.
Powerhouse.
This is an opportunity to make history. One of the things that we don't want to do is to lose our edge. We have won in Michigan, we've won in Pennsylvania, we've won in Georgia, we've won in Arizona, we've won in all of these states, and now there's an effort to pull back the wind. Do you see any daylight from the Secretary of State's office? Do you see any merit in this stuff as we go forward? And is there anything the citizens of Detroit can do, or of Wayne County, of Michigan, to help in this effort?
I think Camelia just highlighted several things. First of all, Georgia is hosting a recount because they've got a rule that says if you are within 1/2 of 1%, if you're that close, that triggers an automatic recount. If you think about the value and the power of the black voter, though, I believe African-American voters have saved this democracy in some significant ways. It was Detroit that delivered for Michigan. It was Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that delivered for Pennsylvania. It was Atlanta in some significant ways that has, the last time I checked, it was 14 or 15,000 votes difference. So I think African-Americans have to continue to live our uniqueness. I heard some of the conversation about defunding or reimagining police officers. I think, and the only thing I would add to that, for example, is African-American police officers should provide the leadership necessary. They know exactly what the issues are, and their sons are just as vulnerable as our sons. So I am saying we're uniquely positioned. That's exactly true, and they are. That's very true, but I think this is where we connect all the dots. The strongest African-American institution is our church. When we start, and then black families, sororities, fraternities, all of us have to do more of what we do well.
Well, you know,
this is our moment.
Some suggest that the whole recount issue grows out of the fact that when black folks were voting, and they were voting in numbers, one of the methodologies they were using to discredit or to diminish that vote was the recount. And so in that instance, historically, that it has impacted the integrity of that vote. And one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that it is only in black cities.
That's the point.
It's only in black cities where this whole effort of questioning
Yes, sir.
the validity of the vote is apparent.
We've got one county in Michigan that is 98% white. They committed all types of human error. Nobody has even.
Nobody has raised a
one out of 83 counties. Nobody's ever referenced them at all. So what you have is a propaganda war. These lawsuits is all designed to shape public opinion. We need to continue to perpetuate our responsibility as trusted messengers. Just because you see it, don't mean you have to believe it. And if they say it, you ought not believe it at all.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for joining us here on the Turning Point. It's been a point that we can turn as we turn this time relative to the election. The black vote is important. It is critical. We've come too far to turn back now. And one of the things that we would want people to do is don't stop now.
That's right.
You can't stop now. You need to vote like your life depends upon it, because quite frankly it does. And we would want to thank everybody who did, in fact, take their souls to the polls and voted. That was so critical. So thank you. And I want to thank our listening and viewing audience for being with us tonight. We appreciate your being with us once again here on The Turning Point. I'm Reverend Wendell Anthony. Stay with us. We'll see you next time right here on The Turning Point. God bless you.